there's another key factor that is every bit as important, and that's our line. And when you think about line, you know, what better place to think about line than standing in the middle of the great redwoods? But there's so much to line. Even when you have clean, straight lines, line is never as simple as it seems. When you look at the redwoods here, well, you're probably going to be like, oh, tall, vertical, really, really powerful image. And you may be right. On the other hand, you might stop and think, well, what's going to be unique? You know, what if we do a horizontal with the tall trees? And we can compensate. We could take a tilt shift lens. We could do all these different things. But when I'm thinking about line in particular, what I want to do is I want to move. And I love trees for this because you can really see and understand how much movement affects what we do. Lines are everywhere, of course, but I love studying lines in a forest because we get to see the lines in relation to this strong vertical composition. And there's actually something we have to watch for here, because when we see a strong vertical composition, like in the redwoods here, we think about lines in terms of their vertical ascent in the frame. So you have the shape of the frame, be it square, be it wide, horizontal, vertical. We can photograph all these different ways. So we're coming in and we're combining the light, right? This may not be the best light. This might get a little more golden and nice toward evening. And yet there's still an element of this golden glow, this beauty in here, right? But when we think about lines, you can say, well, hey, look, there's the vertical lines of the trees. And then you have these different lines. You know, here's these two trees over here on the left of the frame that are crossing over each other. And then you have lines intersecting at the top. You know, you've probably seen framing done just like this before. But the point in understanding all of these things about our lines is not so much to say lines need to be this way or lines need to be that. It's to understand that lines are everywhere. Lines are all around us. Lines are not only in the vertical of the trees, they're in the horizontal of the plants. They're in the bark of the trees going up and around. And so we can think about lines, we can think about texture, all these different things in relation to what we're trying to produce in the final image. A lot of times when you think about a tree-lined path, you think about lines and roads. And this is a good example, I think, because when you're dealing with lines and roads, you're dealing with vertical lines combined with horizontal lines in one of the most basic but very powerful ways. And so you look at a scene like this, and you could do a vertical composition. You could put the road in the far right. You could put the road in the far left. You could have someone walking down the road. You could have a car driving down the road. You can have kind of this missiness. You can actually think about lines and then combine that with how it works with tone. You can wait for a car to drive through and there's actually dust kind of going through the mist of the trees, which gives a different sort of golden glow. You can make the road emphasis, or you can make the tree lines emphasis with a road at the bottom. Think about at all times how horizontal lines meet vertical lines for this marriage that makes a great composition. You're bringing together space, position, line, and tone when you make an image. And regardless of the conditions you're in, if you think about what your light is doing and then make a relationship to what you can do with the line, it gives you a lot of power. It gives you a lot of control over the images you're making. I think if I could give one tip about line, it would be to just stop, to take the time to analyze your line, to actually think it through, to think about your line in relationship to the perspective of your lens or to the look that you're trying to get. You know, you think about lines oftentimes in a forest and you want to point it up, but then you're getting that distortion of the line. Of course, this can be a good effect. It can also be a bad effect. Sometimes you may want a tilt shift lens or another tool, because there's actually line all over the place. And if we change perspective, we see how lines become angular. The ferns become lines if our camera angle is lowered. The fallen tree becomes a line horizontal in the frame that can then be combined with the vertical lines, can be combined with the lines of the ferns. Of course, we're not taking a lot of time just in the camera as I walk around here to think about every possibility of exposure and tone, but you can see how even as we move inches, the perspective of lines totally change. If I come down here, the lines that are strong actually become the angular and the horizontal lines of the ferns. Those can then be combined positionally with the trees, with the vertical lines. You can then bring those into scenes in roads and all kinds of things. Now look at this framing right here. You could have someone right over here in the frame, standing right here, and we could make a beautiful portrait right here using these leading lines. So now the lines that are at one moment composition become leading lines, drawing the eye to a subject, combining the initially seeming confusion of horizontal lines and vertical lines with something that becomes beautiful in a conflagration of lines to produce a composition. Inches can make all the difference in the world in our lines. Inches. Always try to go a little further with your line than you might think. Move around a little more than you might otherwise do. Think about your lines a little extra and see what happens. In this digital world, it's easy to take a lot of images, but a lot of images don't make great photographs. And it's easy to get lured into that. But if we stop, if we take the time, imagine that we're shooting film, or hey, even shoot film. I love my 4x5. Take the time to slow down and analyze the elements of what make a great image, and our images suddenly become much greater. Line is the ultimate way to lead the viewer's eye. It can be used horizontally, it can be used vertically, it can be used in any way that you think it enhances your image making. The only question you have to ask yourself is, what am I trying to produce in this image? How do I want the lines to look? What's the feel of the scene? How am I using the light in relationship to the line? What are my vertical lines? What are my horizontal lines? But another important question is, what is my subject? And what are the lines saying leading to that subject? See, the line is actually how you control the viewer's eye, much like you do with the tone. You can stand in a beautiful place, but you can think about little things like where are subjects placed in relationship to the lines of trees or branches. See, if I move over and if I place my head here versus placing my head in the middle of a tree, I have a more aesthetically pleasing view. Now, the same goes if I'm trying to build a landscape. If I'm trying to construct a scene or an image or a composition that gives me, I have to think in terms of, yes, not only what is my tone and everything else doing, but I have to build in that line. Stopping to take time to think about our line. Stopping to think about, are there trees, are there roads, but also the more micro line, the microchasms of line like bushes, branches, trees, leaves, even the way arms are positioned in a portrait, or the way clothes lead, the way colors create line, the way shadows create line. See, all of these things become line in the frame. I come out into the redwoods and I say, let's look at line, let's analyze these trees, and let's think about line that way. But that's only a way to get us thinking about how we mix and paint and use line with our tone and with our composition. Line is everywhere, always. But if we stop and analyze line, if we stop and think about line when it's bolder, that actually affects the way we think about line when it's more subtle. Because we need to always be aware of line just like we're always aware of tone. When we're aware of the elements, the space, the position, the line, and the tone, then we can consistently make truly great images regardless of the conditions, regardless of the subject. Start combining lines in different ways. Start working with angles, verticals, horizontals, and start thinking how we can mix those lines at different intersections of the frame using things like the rule of thirds, the golden ratio. Put one line in one third and another line in another third. Use one line to lead into the frame or to lead out of the frame. Use your lines in different ways and see how it helps you control your scene.